Don't you just hate it when you get consumed by your art? Every September, I build a lantern for a local festival, and no matter what I say, I always get hyperfixated on it. This year was no different. I told myself I was too busy, and then the next thing I knew, there I was building Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors out of willow, paper, and glue. So let's talk about how to survive when your art tries to eat you. We're constantly told that being creative is good for our well-being, and I know in my life my creativity is essential to my mental health, and it just makes life that much more meaningful. But something that's talked about less is the struggle that multi-passionate neurodivergent creatives have not to become consumed by their projects and end up burning themselves out. I would describe myself as a fiercely passionate creative person, but I do also have the tendency to overwork and just get really absorbed in the things that I'm passionate about. And the consequence of that is I have burnt myself out a few times quite severely, and it did have a significant impact on my mental and physical health. I spent nearly 2 decades trying to find this mythical work-life balance that people talk about, and I've done a lot of research to try and understand my brain and why I have this tendency to burn myself out doing things I love. I've now accepted this part of myself and that no organizational system on the planet is gonna fix this problem for me. So instead, I've experimented and discovered new approaches that help me work with my creative nature and not against it. And because I'm a creativity coach who also supports other neurodivergent, multi-passionate creative people, a lot of what I'm talking about today is based not only on my own personal experiences, but also things I've learned with my clients. So first, let's begin by talking about why it is that neurodivergent creatives are more likely to burn out doing something they love. And I've been diagnosed with ADHD, so a lot of my examples are going to be based on my ADHD, but I think most of this can apply to a variety of neurodivergent people. First, we have to talk about hyperfocus. When a neurodivergent person is engaged in something they find really interesting, they can enter a state called hyperfocus, which is when they become intensely and deeply absorbed in what they're doing. And that sounds great, right? Like hyperfocus is often discussed as one of the superpowers of having ADHD, and it definitely plays its part in how we make incredible things happen, even when we have brains that aren't known for concentrating. But the thing is, ADHD is really badly named, so when you hear attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, you tend to imagine someone who's lacking in attention. But ADHD is really more of a struggle in regulating attention, being able to manage how you shift your attention from one thing to another or give something attention that needs it. So if you've got ADHD, you might struggle to do things that are really boring to you, like your tax return or keeping track of your expenses or replying to that serious government letter or shifting your attention from one thing to another. And I think those are more commonly discussed as experiences of people who have ADHD. But you might also find yourself intensely focused on something that you just cannot step away from, and that is hyperfocus. And there are downsides to hyperfocus. You might become so absorbed in what you're doing that you forget that you're hungry or thirsty, or you need the toilet, or you're tired. You might struggle to remember important things like appointments, or lose track of time, or forget other commitments that you've already made. So while there's this general feeling that being creative is good for us, I do want to point out here that any creative activity tends to use up our energy. And so there's a really big difference between sitting and doing a colouring page for 20 minutes that you're doing because it's relaxing and mindful and pleasurable, and being really deeply absorbed to the point of being consumed by a creative project. That is a completely different use of your energy, and it's going to have a completely different impact on your physical and mental health. Another reason you might find yourself kind of disappearing into your creative projects is executive functioning struggles. So this includes task initiation, like getting yourself started with tasks might take a really long time. You might find yourself procrastinating and avoiding things. But then when you do start, you might also struggle with task switching, which is when you try and shift from one task to another, you get diverted, you get distracted, you're on your phone. And so you're actually losing a lot of time and energy as you try and shift from one thing to a different thing. But if you have struggles with impulsivity, you might find yourself wanting to switch tasks a lot because you're bored of the tasks that you're doing and you're longing for that kind of stimulation of something new. So you can kind of imagine how you're working on something and then you get distracted and you want to do something else, but then you have to switch to that thing. So you end up looking something up and then you lose time and then you feel more tired and then you have to initiate that task again. And it can become a really difficult series of events to navigate. Another one is time management. So estimating how long things are going to take you, being able to work out if you've got time to get something finished and if it's going to be a horrible rush or not. And as we talked about, losing track of time while you're in hyperfocus. And the reason that this can be so difficult is because if we're doing anything that's internally motivated, like we've chosen to do it, or we're self-employed freelancers, we are the masters of our own time. Like nobody's telling us when to do things. So we're actually trying to do all of that ourselves whilst also managing our projects. And it can very quickly feel like the project is managing us. There are also struggles around planning and organisation, so making sure you have the materials you need, knowing where they are so you don't spend all of your time looking for them, working out how to put things in a logical order. These can all lead to more stress around a project, which can then make you feel more urgent or more panicked, and that can kick in this kind of need to compulsively work because you feel like you're running out of time. There also tend to be difficulties for us around self-monitoring. So that's being conscious of your own needs. Like, are you hungry? Are you tired? Do you need to go to the toilet? Have you left the house for several days and felt the sun on your face? For a lot of people, that will result in only stopping when you hit a point of utter exhaustion. If you're someone who has a lot of impulsivity, as I do, then there can be this tendency to just want to dive into an exciting project the moment you imagine it. You're not really thinking through whether it's the right time or do you have the capacity. You just want to start because you're excited. But also when you're doing things, I think impulsivity can play a role because there's that kind of, oh, I'll just get this one bit finished. Oh, I'll just work out how to do that. And that can really kind of keep you tied to something long after you probably should have stopped or had a break. And the last executive functioning element that comes into play is working memory. So you can imagine if you're working on a project, you need to remember what you did last, so you can work out what you're going to do next, work out where you are in a process. And if you struggle with working memory, there can be this sense of kind of losing track of things and feeling quite overwhelmed. Another reason you might feel that your projects are eating up your life is that you're losing perspective due to passion. Neurodivergent people often feel intensely passionate about the things that they care about, and that is a really beautiful part of who we are, but it can make it difficult to work out whether or not you should make this idea or this project or this dream that you've had the central focus in your life at this specific moment. And particularly when you have other commitments, it can lead to ignoring things like your financial needs. So there's this sense of like, yeah, that's fantastic. Who cares about money because you're excited and enthusiastic about something? Or maybe you have other commitments or responsibilities. And for me, this was really a big issue once I became a mum. Before motherhood, I would get really absorbed in things. I would like disappear into my projects for days. And other than being slightly irritating to the people who lived with me, it wasn't really such a big deal. But once I became a mum and I had these day-to-day responsibilities I needed to keep on top of, there is no space for me to just like go off on a creative jolly, and things start to slip quite quickly. And so what I've learned is that while this is a part of me and it's not really ever going to change, I do need to have more self-awareness to make sure that it doesn't end up with piles of washing stacking up or the house getting really dirty, things being really disorganized, because that also then means that my partner has to pick up more of the kind of domestic load, which isn't really fair on him if I have simply got to the point where I'm so deeply into a project and I cannot stop because I can't bear to give up on the sunk costs and be disappointed and I'm running out of time. Another issue that often arises is emotional exhaustion. So neurodivergent people, HSPs, highly sensitive people, have super sensitive nervous systems. We care deeply about things, and I think that's a really beautiful trait in who we are, but it also means that we feel emotions more deeply as well. So we can actually end up emotionally burning ourselves out, especially if things are rushed at the end, or they aren't as we imagined, or we feel disappointed by what we've created. It can actually be a very painful experience for us, and it can lead to emotional burnout, not just physical burnout. And that really relates to rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So RSD is the very painful emotional response to real or perceived rejection. So if you imagine you've been working intensely on a project, you are maxed out, you're exhausted, you haven't eaten properly all week, you're feeling emotionally very drained, and then it comes to sharing this project with the world. And in that moment, any kind of rejection or criticism can be so incredibly painful. Even just like a slightly critical piece of feedback or no response whatsoever. So sometimes I know when I've made things and I've been feeling very vulnerable, kind of emotionally and physically drained by this experience that I've poured myself into, even just the absence of a good response on social media can feel utterly crushing. And the last challenge I want to talk about, which also relates to that, is people pleasing and masking. A lot of neurodivergent people struggle with people pleasing. We find it difficult to set and uphold boundaries. We have a tendency to kind of put our own needs last because we want to make other people happy. But also, we often are masking because we don't want to show people the struggles that we're having. So I know for me, for a long time, I really wanted to project this image of someone who had a wonderful, exciting, carefree relationship with her creativity. And I didn't want them to see the part of me that was pulling all-nighters or crying on the floor of my studio because something had gone wrong or I didn't have time to finish it. I was really ashamed of those parts of who I was, and I thought that people would judge me because it's just art. Like, why can't you be more organized? And so that can make it really difficult to ask for help, to admit when you need things like more time or more support, and it also just feels very inauthentic, and that's quite stressful. So by now you're probably like,
yeah, that's great, Ellie. Thanks so much. That was a bit depressing, but what can we actually do about this?
So the list is hefty, and I wanted to share it in part because maybe you're finding recognition or you're understanding a part of yourself a little bit better, and hopefully that comes with more self-acceptance and understanding that this is not your fault. But I want you to know there are also things that you can do to help mitigate the impact that those traits have on you. There are approaches that you can try so that you can find ways to create the things that you love without pushing yourself so hard and burning yourself out as much. So let's talk about them because they do make a difference. So before we go on, I just want to say I'm not going to talk about organizational systems in this video because I've probably tried most organizational systems under the sun at this point, and a lot of them didn't work for me. And there's a few different reasons for that. I think the first is my inability to maintain a very complicated system. You know, if you're using any system, you have to remember to maintain it. And I would often spend a lot of time building the system and then just forget that it exists. Also, when you're trying to work out if you have time to do this thing you want to do, there's quite a lot of parts to that. Like, you have to be able to look ahead into the future and be like, do I have time for this? And what time will I allocate to this? And then how am I going to do this step by step to make sure that I get it finished on time? And for me, there was so much effort that went into that process, only to find that I fell off the organizational wagon on the first day. And then I was just constantly haunted by this list and system I'd created that I couldn't keep up with. And then the third one is really I never have time to do the things I want to do. Not really. I want to do 1,000 different things, and there's only one of me. And so over time, you're just constantly feeling like, oh, well, I have to say no. I can't do this thing. I can't do this project. I can't make this thing because I can't see a logical time to fit it in. And the rebel in me was like, well, I'm not living like that, so I will just make it happen. And therefore, I think it's better to have approaches that are based on your experiences and your rhythms and patterns than it is to try and find something where you have to change innately who you are to make yourself work in the system. So what can you do instead? Well, one thing that I think works much better for ADHDers than micromanaging our time is to kind of look for overarching patterns in our creative behaviour. For me, community arts festivals, fancy dress parties, people's birthdays, when there's a seasonal event like Halloween or Christmas, those are the things where I tend to get consumed by my projects. They have, for me, the slightly lethal combination of creativity, expectation, and an urgent deadline. I recognise now that these are the things that tend to lead to hyperfocus, lots of late nights, lots of burning the candle at both ends, rushing to get things finished in the daytime, and feeling really tired at the end. It has enabled me to change some things. So one is I will try to avoid scheduling too many client calls or work calls in the run-up to these events, because I know I'll just be kind of in it and I'll need the time to get on. Obviously, you can't always cancel work, so another thing I do is I tend to try and avoid socialising as much. I might schedule to see friends a few days after a big event rather than the days leading up to it when I know I'm going to be really busy. And I might try and kind of slightly anticipate the chaos, so maybe the weekend before I'll try and do an extra load of washing or a little bit of extra cleaning, so that when things slip, which they inevitably will when I'm deep into my creative zone, it won't have as much of a long-term impact. Another side of this all is remembering to give space to recharge and rest after you've done something that is going to take a lot out of you. So I think we often make the mistake, especially if it's something that we're not getting paid for, we're doing it for joy or passion or fun, we don't really consider that it's going to drain us, because we're like, oh, this is a great thing I want to do just because, but it does. It takes our energy, you know, it takes our time. So if we're pouring ourselves into it, we need to give ourselves time to recharge afterwards, or we're going to end up depleted. And I think one of the things I see happen with a lot of creatives is they do their personal projects and they kind of squeeze them in between all of their work projects, which gives a sense of being on an endless sprint. There's no opportunity to take a break in between the things that they're doing. The next one is you have to take breaks. Hyperfocus will tell you don't need breaks, but you need breaks. Taking breaks can be the difference between being just really tired at the end of something quite ambitious and burnt out. And trust me, burnout takes a lot longer and a lot more concerted effort to recover from than just being tired. But if you're like me, you're probably wondering, well, how? How do I make myself take breaks? Because like we talked about, when hyperfocus has kicked in, self-monitoring's gone out of the window, breaks are just like not top of mind. I can't really bring myself out of this thing that I've been doing and remember to take breaks. I work with clients a lot on this, and I honestly think you have to experiment with all sorts of things to work out the break invitation recipe that's right for you. People will often say, oh, use alarms, but I know, for example, if an alarm is on my phone, I have a tendency just to snooze it or turn it off. So actually using a physical alarm on a time timer has proven to be much more effective. Having apps that freeze the internet or freeze access to my phone has also been really helpful, because when I've been listening to podcasts and suddenly that stops, it sort of brings me back up to the surface and I get a little bit more contact with the real world, and then I can be like, oh, I'm actually really hungry and thirsty and I'm tired and my head hurts. The thing that probably does make the biggest difference for me is having an actual human come in and make me take a break. And that's a privilege. Like, we don't always have somebody who can just pop in whenever we need them to and offer us a cup of tea. But I know that having somebody ring me or come into my room while I'll be initially irritated that I've been interrupted because I was busy, I will find that interaction helps me to escape the hyperfocus state, and then I'll probably become more conscious of all the needs I've been neglecting and be like, oh, I think I want to stop. It's also good to prepare yourself for the crash. Like, inevitably, real life will come back into play and you'll be exhausted, you'll possibly be disappointed with the outcome, you'll be embarrassed maybe by some of the consequences of being utterly consumed in something for a while, and you might even feel a little bit silly looking at the creative chaos that you've left in your wake. I always think you need time to rest, and then when you feel a bit better, that's the time to try and reclaim your life from the chaos and like maybe tidy up your house that you've probably trashed. Also, what makes a big difference is just seeing that stuff as one side of the creative coin. The other side, of course, is when we were so excited about imagining this thing we're going to create, or we were just loving being absorbed in making things with our hands and our imaginations, and how it felt to have made something so silly, so over the top, that is so authentically you. It has taken me a long time to learn how to work with this creative energy I have without constantly pushing myself so hard that I'm in total burnout. But these days I don't really try to tame my creative nature. I more try to understand it so I can work with it. And if I'm honest, it's kind of hard to have regrets when you get to march around dressed as a giant man-eating plant or something equally silly. And I often talk to my clients about this too. Acceptance is the key to working out how to support yourself. In conclusion, while sometimes it's fun to get consumed by our art, we also have the power to avoid our art completely consuming us.